Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our guest speaker Bible study tonight. Tonight, our speaker is Mark Kaplan, and he will introduce his topic. Right now, we'll just ask for God's blessing and intervention and protection for this our study tonight. Great Creator God and Father in heaven, we come before you now, asking for your blessing upon this study, on the hearing, upon the speaking. We ask for your inspiration on both hearing and speaking. And Father, we just also ask your blessing and protection upon the electronics, that nothing goes wrong. All the people that are trying to tune in can do so without any difficulty. And we just ask that this goes out smoothly. So, Father, we just thank you now for everything and place this study into your hands. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Good evening. Shabbat Shalom, Sabbath greetings from, I'm down in Central Florida. I'm in the town of Kissimmee near Orlando. And I hear there are people listening possibly all around the world, maybe even in the Philippines. When there was a student came to college where I used to teach, and the students said that they were from the Philippines. And somebody said, wow, didn't Paul write an epistle to that congregation? No. Philippians, there's a difference. But anyway, if you're out there in the Philippines, I appreciate that you're out there. We're on the third day of March. So tomorrow morning, inspire yourself with the date. As you get up, say March 4th. Inspire yourself. But there's an important date I want to talk about this week. This is the 12th month on the sacred calendar. So the winter is winding down, even in Wisconsin. And very soon we're going to have spring. And on Wednesday was the third day of the 12th month on the sacred calendar. And the 2500, it was 2,500 years ago that the Second Temple was completed. And once again, it was fully functional. This was on the third day of the 11th month, back in 516 BC. And I want to cover a period of about 60 years in church history today. That's really an interesting period, a time of revival, a time of also of trial, ups and downs, but overall, ultimately, a very positive period in the history of God's church. This was the ancient church. So I've entitled this talk, An Exciting Period in Ancient Church History. An exciting period in ancient church history. I want to begin by going to Hebrews 13 and verse 8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Jesus Christ, the Logos, the Word of God, is eternal and has been concerned with his church through history. And the church has had its ups and downs, but the church remains a factor. God has a plan, and that plan involves a community. He's working through a community, sometimes very small, sometimes relatively large, but always a minority in the world as a whole. But whatever that church goes through, the church survives. I want to go back to Exodus, the 3rd chapter, and the 2nd verse. And here we have what I would call the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, God the Word, the Logos, Malach Adonai, the angel of the eternal, the angel with a capital A. And this is Exodus 3, verse 2. And the angel of the eternal appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. So it's an interesting picture. In a way, it pictures God's church over the centuries, the people of Israel over the centuries. You know, the churches, the people of Israel at that time were under tremendous pressure. They were enslaved. They were desperately looking to be liberated and to return to their promised land. And so in effect, he's saying, you are burning, but you will not be consumed. The church will survive. It'll have its ups and downs, its trials, but the church will survive. I want to go to Malachi, the third chapter, Malachi 3, and in the sixth verse, Malachi 3, verse 6, God says to the Jewish people of that time, he says, "For I am the eternal, I do not change. Therefore, you are not consumed, O sons of Jacob." You have your ups and downs, but you're going to be there. And to this very day, the sons of Jacob are around, and some of them are still very much identifiable as sons of Jacob. You're listening to one. So that promise, of course, has been kept. Today, I wanted to go into the period in the history of the ancient church when it was under the domination of the Medo-Persian Empire, when the Middle East, including the Holy Land, was under the domination of the Medo-Persian Empire. If you know the imagery in Daniel, this was the bear, and this was also the arms and shoulders of silver in the second chapter, and the bear in the seventh chapter, the second of the great four world ruling empires that dominate the world where the church is based. And so I want to go to the book of Ezra to begin. And the book of Ezra gives historical background before his time, before he's on the scene. You see a background of what took place before. I said I'm going to deal with a period of about 60 years that are really interesting in terms of the history of the church. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. And by the way, that gives me a segue into plugging my own sermons that are being delivered every week, as God wills. We present a sermon on YouTube, CCK 153. And I hope to record another one in the morning, and it'll be out there hopefully in the afternoon. And there are many, many of them archived now, including little tidbits, short talks on all kinds of subjects like humor in the Bible, or the numerical value of words, gematria, and on and on. I've got small ones, short ones, long ones, and quite a large archive of sermons if you're interested. Now I want to go on to Ezra, and I want to go to the sixth chapter of Ezra. And let me say that if you look at the overall history of the church, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. At the end of the Bible are the writings of John, the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Revelation. And this is the conclusion of the Bible, ties it all in together. Dots the I, crosses the T. And so it ties in with earlier parts of the Bible. In fact, there are many, many parallels between Genesis and the writings of John. And as I said, the writings of John kind of put the whole perspective together, put the Bible together in perspective. And in Revelation 2 and 3, John talks about the church in terms of 7 churches with their characteristics. The Ephesus and Smyrna and Pergamos and Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. And they have their strengths and weaknesses that he talks about. Well, they are based on the 7 errors of the Old Covenant church, what Acts 7 calls the church in the wilderness. It begins there, but then it settles in the land, and it goes through 7 stages. And the 5th stage, which is comparable to the Sardis church in Revelation 3, the 5th stage is this period of the Medo-Persian Empire. So this is the Sardis era of the Old Testament. So these are the sardines, you could say. This is the period, as I said, where the 5th period, where the church is being ruled by people who are governors and in effect tax collectors. The church in the land of Israel has local autonomy. And so they're able to actually enforce the Old Covenant locally, but still they're under the Medo-Persian Empire, so they have to send tribute to it. And so their foreign policy is, of course, dictated by the empire in Iran, what is today Iran. So God has governed the Old Testament church in various ways. In that period, he was governing the Old Testament church through governors who were also tax collectors and bearers of tribute to the Medo-Persian Empire. All right, are you everybody's on board with me? I hope. All right, so let's go to the book of Ezra now. And the book of Ezra is interesting because the book of Ezra was written at a time when the Jews were already exiled, scattered. Some had come back to the Holy Land, most had not. So they're interacting more with the Gentile world. And so the book of Ezra has some material of relevance to Gentiles, relatives to those who are not church members. And those parts are written in the Aramaic language, which was the international language of the Medo-Persian Empire. It's very similar to Hebrew and uses the same alphabet as Hebrew. But certain documents here are written in Aramaic, so a non-Jewish person could read them and and understand. But the church matters, the church business then is written in Hebrew. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. So as I go into Ezra 6, I am in the Aramaic language here to begin with. And I want to go to Ezra 6 and verse 14. You may recall that the Jews came back from Babylonian captivity. Cyrus allowed them to return. And when they came back, they were led by Zerubbabel and Joshua. They are, of course, in a way, a type of the two witnesses. Now we have another type. We have Zechariah and Haggai, two prophets who inspired them to get the temple rebuilding project completed. Cyrus had allowed them to go back, rebuild their temple and their city. But they had only established an altar and begun sacrificing, but hadn't gotten the temple built. Now, that one reason for it was opposition from certain local inhabitants who got lawyers and tried to thwart their efforts. But finally, things worked out, and they were able to build. And Zechariah and Haggai inspired them to get the job done. So I'm in Ezra 6 and verse 14. So the elders of the Jews built, and they prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. And they built and fashioned it according to the commandment of the God of Israel, and according to the commandment of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. He even mentions Artaxerxes, who figures later on. He kind of projects forward here in the history. Artaxerxes was a contemporary of Ezra, and this book ultimately deals with Ezra, but right now we're in background material. Now the temple was finished on the third day of the month of Adar. That was Wednesday of this year, was the anniversary of that. Or not Wednesday of this year. What was it? Was it March? Let me see. This is March 5th today. No, this is the March 3rd. So Thursday was the second, Wednesday was the first. Okay, so Wednesday, March 1st this year was the third day of Adar, and 2,500 years have gone by since this scripture. Now, I want to tell everybody something. If you're working with chronology, you all know enough mathematics to know after you go from -1, then you get to 0, then you get to +1. That's okay, not too advanced. Our calendar is a bit off because there is no year 0. We go from 1 BC to 1 AD. So really this year is 2016. I mean, I know it's 2017, but there is no 0 year. So it's really in a certain sense 2016. Everybody okay with that? All right, anyway, verse 15. Now the temple was finished on the third day of the month of Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius, 516 BC. Then the children of Israel, now let me say this, 70 Passovers had gone by. 70 Passovers, a complete number. 70 Passovers had gone by without a temple. Wow, without a temple. Now you have a complete temple. And after 70 Passovers go by without a complete temple, the temple was destroyed in midsummer of 587 BC. And now you finally have a complete temple for the Passover sacrifice, which, as you know, comes about a month after it was finished. The Passover is coming up. It's about a month away. Then the children of Israel, the priests and the Levites and the rest of the descendants of the captivity, celebrated the dedication of this house of God with joy. I'm trying to keep track of time as well. I don't want to go too long here. And they offered sacrifices at the dedication to the house of God, 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats according to the number of the tribes of Israel. So they remembered that they were a remnant of a larger nation that had included 12 tribes. And to this day, they've never forgotten that they are the remnant of a 12-tribe nation. So at that time, they had an offering for all of the 12 tribes. They assigned the priests to their divisions and the Levites to their divisions over the service of God in Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses. See, this is written very basically for people who are not part of the, inside the church community. It's written for people. It's written for general audience. It's written in Aramaic. Then the descendants of the captivity kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month. As you know, the lamb was to be killed at the end of the 14th and then eaten to begin the festival of unleavened bread. The lamb was killed on the afternoon of the 14th, and Jesus Christ, as we know, died at 3 o'clock when the lamb was slain. He died at 3 o'clock on the 14th day of the first month, and we commemorate his death every year on the 14th day of the first month when he died. We have the New Testament Passover. Well, back then, of course, they were having the Old Testament Passover, so they were killing the lamb that afternoon, and then that night they had the festival of unleavened bread. That night would have been the beginning of the festival, the 15th, the night to be much observed. Anyway, I'm now going to verse 20. For the priests and the Levites had purified themselves, and all of them were ritually clean, and they slaughtered the Passover lambs for all the descendants of the captivity, for their brethren, the priests, and for themselves. Are you all still with me? I want to go back just a moment. This is very important. And I almost skipped it because I got all excited talking about the Passover. But let's go back to verse 19. Verse 19 is in Hebrew. In other words, we're talking about church business. We're talking about the keeping of the Passover and the slaughtering of the lambs and so on. So the Aramaic ends in the 18th verse. So let me go back to the 18th verse. They assigned the priests their divisions and the Levites to their divisions over the service of God in Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses. Very basic information for just anybody who needs to know. But now in verse 19, now we're getting more into church business. And so it's in Hebrew. And the descendants of the captivity kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month, as I read. For the priests and the Levites had purified themselves. All of them were ritually clean. And they slaughtered the Passover lambs for all the descendants of the captivity, for their brethren, the priests, and for themselves. Then the children of Israel, who had returned from the captivity, ate together with all who had separated themselves from the filth of the nations of the land in order to seek the eternal God of Israel. So we had a spiritual revival here. So this is an exciting time because we now have a spiritual renewal. These people had sinned. They'd been punished. They came back from captivity. They had their ups and downs upon returning. But now you could say for a while they have their act together here spiritually. And others evidently are even joining them, it seems. And they kept the Feast of Unleavened Bread 7 days with joy, which I hope and pray that all of us will very soon. We have a saying among our people, Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, that from the beginning, when the month of Adar enters, our joy increases. It's an exciting time because the Jewish festival of Purim is coming up, and then a month after that comes the commanded festival on the entire church, the days of unleavened bread. Anyway, I now go to verse 22. And they kept the Feast of Unleavened Bread 7 days with joy, for the Eternal made them joyful and turned the heart of the king of Assyria toward them to strengthen their hands in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. Now, this ruler of Assyria, I presume, is a way of referring to the King Darius, who was over the Medo-Persian Empire, which was ruling over Iraq, where ancient Assyria had been. And I think the reason he's called the ruler of Assyria is to bring to mind how God had punished Israel. The northern kingdom had gone into captivity, initially taken into captivity by the Assyrians. So it was really the Assyrians who began the punishment that came upon God's people. Then the next empire came along, the Chaldean Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, also based in Iraq, and they came and they conquered Judah. And now over them is the next empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, and under that empire there's a partial return. So I think the mention of Assyria is just to kind of keep us in mind of the whole sweep of the history of the church. And speaking of the sweep of history, when we come to verse 22, we now have an interruption or period of time before you got to the 7th chapter of Ezra. And that is filled in the book of Esther. So now we go from 516, we go now to the time of Xerxes the First, Ahasuerus. And he is ruling from 486 to 465 BC. So we're moving up in history somewhat. And we're in the period of the 470s BC. And I'll find Esther. Okay, yeah, Esther comes right after here, doesn't it? Right before Job in this order of books. This is not the Hebrew order of books. I'm using a New King James translation, so it's not the Hebrew order of books. But we go now to the time of King Xerxes, and we find that, as you know, most of the Jews did not return. They were living in exile. They were scattered throughout the Medo-Persian Empire, and many of them were living in Iraq and Iran, what is today Iraq and what is today Iran. And there was a wicked advisor to King Ahasuerus who had some very wicked ideas about what he wanted to do to God's church. But before he ever hatched his plot, God had already set in motion the means to deliver his people. You know, we have a saying among my people that God gives you the cure before he gives you the disease, or before he allows the disease. So we had the situation where Mordecai of the tribe of Benjamin, part of the nation of Judah, evidently had a prominent role in the bureaucracy of ancient Persia, and he had reared his cousin Esther, Hebrew name Hadassah. She was the daughter of his uncle Avihail, and he had reared her, and various circumstances came about so that she became queen of the empire. So now we have Mordecai as a trusted advisor to the king, and now we have Esther as queen. So they're in the right place at the right time. And it's interesting when we get to excuse me, to the end of chapter 2 of the book of Esther. We find there was a plot to assassinate Ahasuerus. And you know what? He finally was assassinated much later. He ruled from 486 to 465, but he finally was assassinated. But this time, the plot failed. And it failed because Mordecai somehow got wind of it, passed the secret on to Esther. She saves and she tells the king, so Mordecai winds up saving the king's life. And so things are being prepared for, what will happen later. I guess I should read this in verse 21, Esther 2:21. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigtan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles of the presence of the king. But unfortunately, we have a wicked, genocidal maniac who somehow is able to convince King Ahasuerus that he's quite a competent person, and he becomes like the number 2 man in the empire. And we find that Mordecai refused to worship him, refused to be very subservient to him, and he decided he wanted to wipe out all of Mordecai's people. And the argument he uses is very interesting. It's the same argument that would be used all through history against God's church. God's church is a minority. They have a different way of life than others, and so people can be suspicious of them. People can think all kinds of ill of them because they're different. They don't quite fit in. And so this argument, of course, is always there to be used when there's a desire to persecute the church. So in this case, in Esther 3 in verse 8, then Haman, actually, this is a bad noisemaker. Oh, I got a bum one. That's too bad. Anyway, I chose, of all the noisemakers, I had to choose a bad one. But this is a noisemaker such as you would hear if you went to a synagogue on the night of March 11th, Saturday night. Not tomorrow night, but the night after. Whenever Haman's name is read, when they read the scroll of Esther, they hear noise, but much better than this. This is a bad one. All right. But you got the general idea. So anyway, if you want to hear a lot of noise, go to a synagogue Saturday night and listen to the book of Esther. And then you'll probably have a headache for a while. All right. Anyway, so Esther 3 and verse 8. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. Okay, so now we have a crisis in the history of the church, the possibility of physical extermination. There are two ways that Satan attacks the church. One way is through keeping them alive, but trying to assimilate them, either through pressure or through seduction. You try to allure them, tempt them, attract them to wrong ways of life, or pressure them into it. And when that doesn't work, just try to get rid of them all, just physically obliterate them. So that's been the strategy over the centuries, either assimilation or physical destruction, genocide. You see that through the Bible. And in this case, this is what the decision was. If all the Jews are destroyed, of course, then Jesus Christ is not going to be born. Obviously, God intervened here. Anyway, verse 9. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work to bring it into the king's treasuries. Now, we understand that God has set things up so that this wouldn't happen. And in verse 14, we find that Esther is debating, should she risk her life to try to save her people? And Mordecai, with great faith, says, God will save us one way or the other, but you really have this responsibility, and you should follow this responsibility. You'll be held accountable if you don't. I'm kind of paraphrasing the account, but I'm going to read it in verse 14. In fact, I'm going to go to verse 13. This is Esther 4, verse 13. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Oh, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And so this is what happened. She risked her life, and she, in effect, gave her life for her people, as Jesus Christ did for us. And in this case, her life was spared, and her people were spared, and in fact, were able to punish those who were out to get them. They were able to take the lives of those who wanted to take their lives. They won a great victory, and they became a kind of privileged minority. For a brief period of time, it was the in thing to be Jewish, And in chapter 9 and verse 1, well, I'm going to go to verse 17 of chapter 8. So we have here a situation. Why don't you bring me a good grogger, okay? Good. I'd like these people in Wisconsin to hear what a good grogger sounds like. We call them in Hebrew ra'ashan. Anyway, let's go to verse 17. Ra'ash means noise. They're noisemakers. Anyway, and in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. For many of the people of the land became Jews because fear of the Jews fell upon them. So now, instead of being a persecuted minority about to be completely extinguished, now it became the in thing to be in that group. To be an MOT, as we say, member of the tribe, became the in thing. And this is, of course, a sort of type of the millennium. And the millennium, of course, everybody will want to be a part of God's church. The church will be the way to go. We want to go to Esther 9 and verse 1. Now, in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, we're here.
All right, does everybody hear me? Mike? Okay, I'm going to call him and see if he lost his connection. That's the way it looks. It looks like his connection got slow.
Okay. Can you hear me now out there?
Yes, we hear you. Ignore your phone.
Oh, okay. Did you miss anything?
We missed everything in the last 2.5 minutes.
Okay. You missed the last 2.5 minutes, but you can hear me now. Okay.
Yeah, why don't you leave your camera off? I think we had an internet issue because your camera froze and some other stuff froze. You started to break up. So between you and I, we've got a clog in the internet. So just leave your camera off and continue presenting.
Okay. Let me just talk to my techie here. He said, leave my camera off and continue presenting. Is that what I'm doing?
I would assume so.
Okay. All right. So
the last thing we heard, I think, was you were talking about Ruth was told, if you do not
Esther.
do this, God will cook a different way. And you may have been brought to this point for this crisis. And that's when we lost you.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for your patience. Everybody back on board? Good. Okay, I'm back in action. All right. So we know what happened. Not only were the Jewish people spared extermination, but now they became a kind of privileged minority within the empire. In other words, now it became the in thing to be a church member. Whereas before, everybody was down on them, wanting to murder them and take everything from them. Now they understood that they had the favor of the monarch. And so now everybody wanted to be an MOT, a member of the tribe. So as we see here in Esther 8 and verse 17, and in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews because fear of the Jews fell upon them. So you see that at this time in history, this is around 472 BC. At this time in history, in the 5th century BC, after going through a lot of trials and tribulations, things are now really breaking in the church's favor, you could say. The meaning of Purim is lots. Haman had cast lots to decide what day to try to destroy the Jews. And now you could say the lot has turned the other way, and his star has fallen, to say the least. And so, as I said, this is a very special time in the history of the church, because now the church is in a position to be revived, not only saved physically, but also revived spiritually, as you'll see in a moment. So the temple had been rebuilt, and there had been a remnant that had returned, but they remained very vulnerable, in the Medo-Persian Empire. And as you see, they were nearly exterminated. But now they had risen to great prominence. Mordecai was very prominent. Esther was prominent, and many Jews became prominent during that time. Esther 9 and verse 1. So you see why the Jews celebrate Purim from year to year. And I think you missed out on these noisemakers. So I'll do one of these. So you can hear a little bit of noise. As I said, we call these things Rashanim. The word Rash means noise. So we make noise on Purim and celebrate. Anyway, Esther 9 and verse 1. Now in the 12th month, it is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed. On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. So a complete reversal of fortune. And you can understand, therefore, why, if you keep reading the chapter, that they established a festival on the day that they rested from their enemies, the 14th day of the 12th month, and then on the 15th day. These are days of joy and celebration, the holiday of Purim, which Jews have celebrated from that time to this. It's not commanded on the entire church. It's something that the Jewish people were involved with and accepted upon themselves to keep. You can read that in the book of Esther. But it is interesting that it comes a month before the days of unleavened bread. And it's very good to read the book of Esther during Purim, 1 month before the days of unleavened bread, because it reminds you that we are on the winning team. It reminds you that if you read the Bible, you come to the end of the book and we win. And so if we want to remain on the winning team, we need to prepare ourselves during this season as we approach the days of unleavened bread. Make sure that we are on the right track spiritually and ready to take the Passover about a month from now. So we come to the time of Esther and Mordecai, and you can see that the Jews had a great deal of positive influence. So you can understand now why Ezra was allowed by the next ruler, Artaxerxes. Xerxes dies, Artaxerxes becomes king, and now we come to the year 458, 457 BC, which incidentally is really the last recorded Jubilee year. There no longer were Jubilee years after that time. The sabbatical year continues to be observed, and as some of you know, this last sabbatical year was should have been 2014, 2015, right? And the next one will be 2021, right? It'll be the next sabbatical year. Right, we had 93, 2000, 2007, 2014. Next one will be, next one will be 2021. But the Jubilee year stopped at that point. Anyway, Ezra comes back, and we go now back to the book of Ezra, and we pick up the account in Ezra 7. Now we're in 457 BC, a very important time, because at this time, those of you who are listening to me, we have the beginning of the fulfillment of the 70 weeks prophecy, because Ezra's return really completes the restoration of Judah. They were able to return to the land. They had their temple rebuilt, but they were still not able to fully control the area as they needed to, and ultimately to rebuild the walls. And so Ezra comes back. He reestablishes in a stronger way the old covenant, God's way of life. He reestablishes it in Judah because they had begun to drift away from it. He reestablishes God's way of life in Judah, and then after him comes Nehemiah, and you can read the book of Nehemiah. And in Nehemiah, what's the idea? Build that wall, which he does. But let's go to Ezra 7. And in Ezra 7, we find his genealogy is given, and then we find that I'll jump back to verse 6, or up to verse 6. He's a priest, Ezra. This Ezra came up from Babylon and he was a skilled scribe in the law of Moses, which the eternal God of Israel had given. The king granted him all his requests according to the hand of the eternal his God upon him. You can understand, this is 457. It's not long. It's about 15 years after the events in the book of Esther. So there's still that influence, positive influence that the Jews still had. And that probably had a role in the fact that Artaxerxes gave Ezra authority. Go back there, you're under the Persian Empire, but in your own area, you can apply the Torah. You can apply the Old Covenant in your area. You can rule them according to the Old Covenant as long as you're not disloyal to the empire. Verse 7, some of the children of Israel, the priests, the Levites, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the Nethinim came up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. Now, the Nethinim were probably descendants of the Canaanite peoples who in Joshua 9 had committed themselves to be servants in the temple. The tabernacle in those days, and later on the temple. And after a while, they, I think, just simply assimilated into the community. Verse 8, and Ezra came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. So that's 457 BC. And now we have the beginning of the 70 weeks. On the first day of the 1st month, he began his journey from Babylon. And on the first day of the 5th month, he came to Jerusalem. So about midsummer, to Jerusalem, according to the good hand of God, of his God upon him. For Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of the eternal and to do it, and to teach statutes and ordinances to Israel. So you see, he was back there to get them spiritually in shape. They had gotten out of shape spiritually. And, that's what got them booted out of the land in the first place. He didn't want that to happen again. It did finally happen in 70 AD. In AD 70. They were finally booted out. They didn't come back until modern times. Verse 11. This is the copy of the letter that King Artaxerxes gave Ezra the priest, the scribe, the expert in the words of the commandments of the eternal and of his statutes to Israel. And now we go to Aramaic, because now we're giving the document. This is the official document of the Persian Empire. It's written in Aramaic, so a Gentile could also understand it. Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra the priest, a scribe of the law of the God of heaven, perfect peace, and so forth. I issue a decree that all those of the people of Israel and the priests and Levites in my realm who volunteer to go up to Jerusalem may go with you. And whereas you are being sent by the king and his 7 counselors to inquire concerning Judah and Jerusalem with regard to the law of the eternal your God, which is in your heart, and whereas you are to carry, in verse 15, the silver and gold which the king and his counselors have freely offered to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem. See how this is worded. It's worded for you might say, a non-member, to make clear what's going on. And whereas all the silver and gold that you may find in all the province of Babylon, along with the freewill offering of the people and the priests, are to be freely offered for the house of their God in Jerusalem. Now, therefore, this is a document. You see how it's worded in kind of legalese. Now, therefore, be careful to buy with this money bulls, rams, and lambs, with their grain offerings and their drink offerings, and offer them on the altar of the house of your God in Jerusalem. This is what the Persian monarch is telling them. And whatever seems good to you and your brethren to do with the rest of the silver and gold, do it according to the will of your God. So I'm in verse 19 now, reading this document. Also, the articles that are given to you for the service of the house of your God, deliver in full before the God of Jerusalem. And whatever more may be needed for the house of your God, which you have occasion to provide, pay for it from the king's treasury. I guess I'll read the rest of it. I don't want to, just sort of bog down in the weeds here, but, this is scripture, so I'll read it. And even I, Artaxerxes, the king, issue a decree to all the treasurers who are in the region beyond the river, the Euphrates, that whatever Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven may require of you, let it be done diligently. So this is a very important period where the secular authority is willing to back up the authority of the church and allow the people in the land of Israel to live according to the law that God had given them to fulfill their purpose as a model nation, as the chosen people, chosen for a purpose, to be the example. And he talks about, what he's giving to them, up to 100 talents of silver, 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of oil, and salt without prescribed limit. So he gives them a generous portion of what they need. Whatever is commanded by the God of heaven, let it diligently be done for the house of the God of heaven. For why should there be wrath against the realm of the king and his sons? So they evidently took the God of the Jews seriously, and you can understand why. 15 years before, the Jews had won that tremendous victory and had slaughtered over 75,000 of their enemies who were out to kill them. So they had won a great victory and had established themselves as a significant part of that empire, and so their God was now respected. The God of Israel was respected. Also, we inform you that it shall not be lawful to impose tax, tribute, or custom on any of the priests, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, Nethinim, or servants of this house of God. So the ministry had certain exemptions. And you, Ezra, now in verse 25, and you, Ezra, according to your God-given wisdom, set magistrates and judges who may judge all the people who are on the region beyond the river. Also just know the laws of your God and teach those who do not know them. And this is what he wanted to do, to come back and make sure people understood what God required of them, and then to do it. So he had the desire to teach it, and he had the authority to teach it, and then the desire to enforce it, and he had the authority to enforce it. And he also, of course, had to enforce the laws of the Persian Empire. And we notice this in verse 26. Whoever will not observe the law of your God, let me go back. Whoever will not observe the law of your God and the law of the king, let judgment be executed speedily on him, whether it be death or banishment or confiscation of goods or imprisonment. So whatever the law requires, whatever the Old Testament law required in terms of the law that was being enforced there, and then whatever the Persian Empire law required for violating its laws, Ezra had the authority to carry that out. So a very important time. So this way, God's people were being prepared to survive spiritually and to maintain Jerusalem as a very important spiritual center. Now, Nehemiah finished the job by coming back and purifying the church even further because it again had gotten lax. Ezra had not been entirely effective. Perhaps he was absent for a time. I don't know all of the ins and outs of what happened, but after Ezra's time, once again, they had gotten lax, and Nehemiah came back, and he completed the job, you could say, of disciplining the congregation, getting it observant of God's way of life, and also completing the physical rebuilding of the walls around Jerusalem. Now notice, all this having been said, now we go back to Hebrew, because now Ezra is praying. Now we go back to church business now. And in verse 27, the Aramaic is over. The document is finished. And now Ezra prays. And in Hebrew, he says, blessed be the eternal God of our fathers. Our fathers now. He's talking to the church. Blessed be the eternal God of our fathers, who has put such a thing as this in the king's heart, to beautify the house of the eternal, which is in Jerusalem, and has extended mercy to me before the king and his counselors, and before all the king's mighty princes. So I was encouraged as the hand of the eternal my God was upon me, and I gathered leading men of Israel to go up with me. So he went up with this document in hand, and he began to be a renewal of his people. And as I said, for some reason, he was not fully effective. Nehemiah then came and finished the job, and also finished the physical job of rebuilding the walls. And that's covered in the next book, the book of Nehemiah. So we see that during that period, that roughly that 60-year period, God had taken the church and revived it spiritually. And even though it had gone through a very severe trial, had saved it from physical extinction and had given it physical blessings, influence, and a better, probably more prosperity than they'd had before, and the opportunity then to have freedom of religion, the opportunity to actually obey God as without interference from the secular authorities, and then in the land of Israel, even the encouragement of the secular authorities to enforce God's way of life there. So it's a very exciting period in the history of the church, and it does remind us that the church goes through ups and downs. It waxes and wanes, but it survives. And God has intended the church to be permanent, a permanent part of human history, and ultimately, of course, to dominate human history for the good of all human beings. I want to finish in Matthew, the 16th chapter. Matthew 16. And here Jesus Christ says about the church just what was said in Malachi 3 and verse 6. I am the eternal light, do not change, therefore you sons of Jacob are not consumed. And so in Matthew 16 and verse 18, he talks to Peter, who he named Peter, or Rock. He named him Rock. Maybe we would call him Rocky today. Rocky. And I also say to you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. People discuss what that is, but I believe Peter was very much a very important factor in the beginning of the church. As you know, if you read the book of Acts, you see how prominent he was in those early years. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. The church will survive through history, and Hades, or the realm of the dead, death, is a limitation. It's like a wall. You go so far and then you stop. You come to those gates, they're locked, you can't go farther. All of us are going to die ultimately. But as you know, the Bible does promise those who are a part of the Church of God, it promises, everyone will ultimately be resurrected, but those who are part of the church will be resurrected to immortal life. But the church itself is not limited by the gates of Hades. It can break through, can go through them or over them, however we do it. It can continue on and live on through history. It has its ups, it has its downs. It has times when it is not maybe having the impact that it should have, or that it ultimately will have. But then finally we have these periods of revival when the church does accomplish a great deal, have a tremendous impact, and ultimately we're going to come to a time when the church will be very much having an impact on world history. As a result, persecution will come, persecution such as under Haman. We'll have both kinds of persecution. We'll have the Antiochus type, and we'll have the Haman type. We'll have the persecution of trying to take them away from what they believe in practice, trying to entice them or pressure them. And then ultimately we'll have the Haman type persecution, the attempt to just exterminate them. But both attempts will fail, and ultimately God will intervene, and ultimately the church will then come to be, the ruling family of God, bringing to the world peace, prosperity, and true freedom. So we can think about that as we study this particular exciting period in ancient church history. So I hope this has been helpful, and if there's any questions on anything that I've covered, or anything else that's related to the Bible, I'll try to answer it. I'm sorry about the interruption there. I hope you heard the rest of it.
Yeah, everything came through fine now.
Okay.
There's a question in the chat room, and also I'm going to go to question and answer mode, which means you can unmute your mic and ask a question. You can turn your webcam on, so if you have one, then we can see who's asking the question. So we'll be going to question.
I have a wonderful question already that I'd like to comment on. All right. The temple was the second temple that I've been talking about today, that was finished in 516, was greatly embellished by Herod the Great. One thing about him, he was a wicked man, but a great builder. And the temple was embellished by Herod. It was beautiful. It was an architectural jewel, finally. But it was destroyed in AD 70. And with the destruction of the temple, the Jews were scattered. A great exile occurred. Many died. and many were scattered. Many were taken to Rome to be slaves. In fact, they built the Colosseum in Rome, which is still there. And if you go to Rome, you can see the Arch of Titus celebrating the conquest of Judah. But even though the Jews were conquered and scattered, there still were a certain number that remained in the land. And much later, in 133, they rose in revolt against Rome. Now, they had no temple then, and they didn't have the same kind of infrastructure that they had in the first century. But in the second century, there was another revolt against Rome. This time, it was led by a man whom some thought to be the Messiah. They called him Bar Kokhba, the son of the star, which is because of the prophecy of Balaam in the book of Numbers. Behold, the star of Jacob shining, the scepter from Israel rising. Maybe remember that from the oratorio, the Handel's Messiah. But anyway, Bar Kokhba was the last great attempt of the Jews to reestablish their separate identity and throw off the yoke of oppression. But it failed. The Bar Kokhba revolt failed. So that was really the final end. And the last independent Jewish state, you could say, was that under Bar Kokhba, but it was very brief. So that's, it was just like a footnote, not, it's a very tragic footnote. We had the AD 70 destruction of the Second Temple and all that went with that. But even after that, there was yet another Jewish revolt against Rome in 133 that ended in 135 unsuccessfully. And that really was the end then until modern times. So I hope that clarifies the question.
Okay. When you go to question and answer mode, I'd like to remind everybody to keep their microphones muted until you're actually speaking. And then when you're done speaking, you can mute your mic again. So here we're going to go to question and answer mode. One moment.
All attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
So those of you on the phone, you press *6. That'll unmute your phone. We have one tonight. So any questions, comments?
Hello, Mark. This is Jim Rudd. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Question for you, because it brought up when I was listening to your presentation. For close to 2 millennia, the Jews were basically given no homeland. They were actually promised a homeland after World War I, and that promise was reneged. I know there are a lot of anti-Semites who say the Holocaust was a punishment upon the Jews, and obviously that's totally garbage. But God oftentimes requires martyrs to perform what he wants. Do you think that the Holocaust was designed to bring in the end times in the same way Esther was designed to be put in a certain spot, and that brought about the nation of Israel?
You brought up a very deep, heavy kind of subject.
Yeah, I didn't mean to make it that heavy, but if it popped into my mind,
what I mean by heavy is that there's just you could do the Holocaust itself and the role that it plays. What I'll do is cover some thoughts on it. I don't think I can fully answer your question, and I don't know if we can fully understand the significance of that period even now. I think there may yet be more understanding later that will come our way about that period and why it happened and so forth. But I will say that
Mark, just one quick interruption. I don't want to put you on the spot. It's just, we were looking at a Holocaust. we were looking at a Holocaust at the time of Esther, and that's why that popped into my head. And so I'm not a big prophecy person. Prophecy is about repentance and not predicting the future. But just when you were speaking, it popped into my head, and I'm like, I wonder if the two are related, and I wonder what Mark thinks about that.
Well, as I said, no, you're not putting me on the spot at all. No. I'm just saying that to a full answer to your question would take a lot of time. Would take a whole other talk. But I would like to give some thoughts relating to what you're saying. I'm grateful. I'm glad you asked the question. I would like to say something very, very sobering. As bad as the Holocaust was, there's coming a much, much greater one, as we understand, in the Book of Revelation, that will involve even, unfortunately, much larger numbers of people and a greater percentage of the human race overall, as we know. Before the final conclusion of history, and then the wonderful period that's coming after, there's going to come what we call in Hebrew Hevle HaMashiach, the labor pangs of the Messiah. So it's like when a woman is giving birth, she has very intense pain, and then out comes the baby. So we understand, if we read the Book of Revelation, that tremendous calamities occur on the world because of the preponderance of sin, and then finally we have the conclusion of that very, very horrific period. Brief, yes, but very horrific. And then we have the millennium. So the Holocaust, when we look back on it, as bad as it was, I can't minimize it, but yet we know an even greater Holocaust is coming upon the human race than that. But as far as the Holocaust is concerned, I would have to say that it's very likely that the state of Israel today would very likely not exist had there not been a Holocaust, because, as you say, the nations of the world came together. They said that the Jews were entitled to a homeland, and they initially gave them the region of Palestine. Then they decided, I'm sorry I'm going to give you such a long answer, but I need to explain. I'll blame you, for the answer. So anyway, they gave them the region of Palestine, and then they decided, well, now wait a minute. The vast majority of the population there are not Jewish; they're Arab. So they decided, well, we'll take the East Bank and we'll separate it out. So that's 77% of the area, and they created an Arab state, which today is called Jordan. Then the rest of it, from the west of the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, the other 23%, they said, okay, that will be the Jewish homeland. But as you know, that didn't work out either. And finally, in 1947, they split that in half, and they said, we'll give half to the Arabs and half to the Jews. And then we've had the last 70 years of war over it. But that very likely would not have happened. The fact of the state of Israel, that it exists, probably would the Holocaust probably is what, for a brief period. If you look at the history, you'll be very interested to know the United States and the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, both voted yes back in 1947 to create a Jewish state. Back on November 29, 1947, the United Nations overwhelmingly voted for partition of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state, and the Soviets voted for it, the United States voted for it. Kind of unique, and some of that was because of the Holocaust, creating a certain sympathy for the Jews on the part of the world, and a certain desperation among the Jews. The Jews needed to, in effect, become so desperate that they fought very, very hard to have a state, and the world had to become sympathetic enough to allow it. And so that was kind of a unique period, and I suppose the Holocaust was a factor in that. So that's only a partial answer to your question. I do believe this. All right, I'll say more. I think that for prophecy to be fulfilled, there needed to be a Jewish state for certain prophecies to be fulfilled. When you look at don't get me wrong. There's a lot more that has to happen, but that was an important part of the fulfillment of prophecy, I believe. But a lot more still has to happen. So I hope I've partially answered your question.
No, and I would say that's a big part of why Messianic Judaism exists, is because the nation of Israel now exists, and therefore prophecy can continue.
Okay, well, all right. See, on the other hand, uh, I am speaking to an audience basically of people who most of you who are listening are part of the Church of God. So I want to caution everybody to be very careful about mixing religion and politics. Be very careful about that. About deciding that a politician is biblical or non-biblical, or a political position is biblical or non-biblical. That's very, very dangerous. To sort of to mix religion and politics is very dangerous. Let me just mention that. Mike, I'm seeing you and not hearing you. Jonathan, could you help? I'm seeing him and I'm not hearing him.
Mike, you have to unmute your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yep.
yes, I can. Yeah.
I needed to push 2 buttons and I only pushed 1. But the word Shoah is used,
For the Holocaust, yeah.
for the Holocaust. Is that word in the Bible, in the Hebrew, and how is that translated to English in the Bible, if it is?
I honestly don't know if that word. I'm hearing an echo. Okay, I don't know why I'm hearing it, but
Mute your mic while he answers, Mike.
Mike, mute your mic while he answers.
Okay, good. It's a very good question. I should know the answer to that, but off the top of my head, I don't. However, I don't think it is. I actually think it's a term that came post-biblical, but I'll check that out and get back with you. I don't think it is, but because as you say, the term Holocaust as such is not in the Bible in that term. That term isn't in any translation that I've ever seen, the term Holocaust. But the Hebrew term Shoah, I think it is a post-biblical term, but I will check that out. I appreciate the question. I will check. I should know the answer. I'm embarrassed, but that's what can I do? I don't know the answer offhand. I don't think it is, but I'll check it out. I don't think it is though, but I'll check.
And I'll just segue to my next question, as long as I have your attention. In Esther 4:16, it's talking about Esther's fast, that everybody did, and they went without food or drink. But the word sum, Hebrew word sum, that
for
it's
fast, right?
And that they. So I'm just looking at it in the general sense. Does that usually always mean without food and without water, or how is that word used? Are there other kinds of fasts biblically?
I think that term is usually used for a fast with no food or drink. Now, there are times, for example, in the case of Daniel, I'll have to see what he calls what he did. Daniel went for about 3 weeks, I believe, without meat and wine. And I don't know if he refers to it as a fast. Let me just look at Daniel. If we look at Daniel 9, here it is. Okay, in Daniel 10 and verse 2. All right? Daniel 10:2, he says, in those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant food, nor meat, or wine came into my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. But the term there is not fast. So I personally don't know of a fast in the Bible that is other than not eating and drinking. My personal understanding of fast. Nowadays in Hebrew, when we speak about fasting, we use that word, tzom. We call a fast a tzom. For example, the fast of Esther is coming up, and other fasts come through the year. Most of the Jewish fast days are from dawn to dusk, but 2 of them are full, more than 24-hour fasts. One of them is, of course, the biblically commanded Day of Atonement, and the other is the 9th day of the 5th month, the 9th of Av. That is a full, more than 24-hour fast, as is the Day of Atonement. The other 4, which are mentioned in the book of Zechariah, the other 4, and the fast of Esther, which is implied in the book of Esther, are from most Jews observe from dawn to dusk. But during that period, they're not eating or drinking, and they are not bathing. So that as far as I know, I don't know of a fast other than not eating and drinking. Again, but I'll check that out. But I don't know of it I don't remember it. It doesn't come to mind at all.
That's what it seemed to me, and I was just looking for confirmation, but that's exactly what I thought.
Yeah. All right, good. Okay, so we agree. That's good.
Yeah.
Harmony prevails. Well, I appreciate these questions. These are good questions. By the way, that term Shoah, I think you will find it in the Israeli Declaration of Independence. That's where the term first became used, was in the Israeli Declaration of Independence. And it took time till it actually caught on, and the term Holocaust was used. In the Jewish community used it, but it didn't become part of popular culture until more recently. When I was a child, the term Holocaust was used in the Jewish community, but I don't remember it being used that much until more recent history. Now, of course, it's standard term. But you'll first see it in the Israeli Declaration of Independence as a popular term, May 14th, 1948. Well, I don't see any more. Wait a minute. I see something else here. Somebody is telling me. Somebody is telling me something. Yeah, here's the thing. Somebody is telling me some more historical information. Right after Israel declared its independence, within minutes, the United States gave it recognition. Just really a few minutes after it declared independence. But that was what we call de facto recognition. The more firm recognition is called de jure recognition. And actually, the Soviet Union, I think, was very early, gave it that kind of recognition. But yeah, the first state to recognize Israel was the United States. And I believe Guatemala may have been the second. But the Soviet Union recognized Israel very early. And actually, the weapons that the Israelis used to defend themselves in that first war came from the Soviet bloc. It was Czechoslovakia that supplied the weapons that saved the Jewish state in its early days. So the United States was not arming them at all. In fact, technically, they weren't allowing weapons to go there. Weapons were being smuggled there. And I don't know how strictly they enforced that law, but the weapons that came from the United States to Israel had to be smuggled there, whereas the Czechs were openly giving the Israelis weapons in 1948. But Truman is very, beloved in Israel. There's a forest planted in his honor, And Truman thought of himself as Cyrus. If you ever read any histories about Truman, of course, the famous biography of Truman was by David McCulloch, and I think he probably mentions there Truman thought of himself as Cyrus. Are you still hearing me? Is everything okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Jim,
All right.
question?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Mark, the Jim
Yes.
Rudd. One more quick question about
All right.
Purim.
All right.
My boys love Hamantash, and we mark Purim, but we don't really observe it because my ancestry is Cherokee. I know there's a lot of Christians who say that, it's a Jewish holiday and therefore all Christians should observe it. But I look at it as sort of like 4th of July. And that is, if I'm French, I observe Bastille Day. I don't observe the 4th of July. I was wondering what you think about Christians observing Purim. Like I said, we mark it, but we don't really observe it in the same way as Atonement or the 4th of July.
Yeah, that's a reasonable point of view. Yeah, sounds reasonable. What you said is, makes sense to me. What you do, I think that it's good that you mark it because it's an important part of church history, and the Book of Esther is in the canon, and the events that came to a climax occurred in the middle of the 12th month. So it's good at that time of year to read about those events. Just like, as you say, on the 4th of July, you think about the American Revolution, and on Bastille Day, even if you're not French, but probably the newspapers say today is Bastille Day. It commemorates the French Revolution and so forth. So people therefore have a certain awareness. So I would agree that the Church of God should be aware. But as far as observing of it, that's something the Jews committed to do, not the entire church. Okay, you still on?
Yeah, I'm just putting up a cck153.org is your website. And then there is the
No, I'm YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah, the www.youtube.com/user/cck153, and that'll take you to your. So,
all right. Okay.
I throw it up there. That way, those people who view the YouTube later on can see that you have your own YouTube channel, and they can go to it.
So
there it is.
this is on this Bible study. This Bible study is on your website, right?
This Bible study will go up on our YouTube channel, and then the people who view it will see this on the recording, and then hopefully we'll go to yours and get more.
How do they go to? What do they do when they go to your YouTube? What is your channel?
We just usually get it through thinkgod.org, thinkgod.org, past presentations, and that's got a link that takes you right to our channel. Our channel is way too long. It's way too. The string of letters is just too long. Just go to thinkgod.org, thinkgod.org, and click the past presentations, and then click the YouTube link. The fastest way there.
Okay. Well, probably we should probably finish about now, right?
Yeah. I'll. Any other questions about the topic? Last call.
Okay, well, I hope this has been helpful, and I appreciate those who took the time to listen, because you could have been relaxing and sipping wine and cheese or whatever you do to relax. But instead, you decided to have to concentrate on a Bible study. So I appreciate your interest and wish you a very restful and rejuvenating Sabbath, and hope that we can stay in communication. Thanks very much.